The dust of the Palatine still tasted of Galba's blood, a coppery tang that clung to the back of the throat, a grim reminder of how swiftly power could be unmade. It was the third morning since the city had woken to a new name on its lips, a name that felt foreign, clumsy, a stone caught in the throat of Rome: Otho. Yet as the sun bled across the 7 hills, it was not Otho's name that troubled Senator Gaius Cassius Longinus, but the silence that followed it, a silence as profound and unnerving as the calm at the heart of a hurricane. Gaius stood on the portico of his domus, the chill of the January air seeping through his woolen toga. Below, the city was a sprawling wounded beast, its usual morning roar reduced to a nervous murmur. The Praetorian Guard, kingmakers and kingslayers, patrolled the streets with a swagger that was too loud, their armor glinting with a belligerent shine. They had been bought, their loyalty a commodity traded for the promise of gold. Galba, the old, miserly fool, had refused to pay the price, and had paid with his life instead. His severed head, paraded on a spear, had been the coronation of his successor. His wife, Livia, joined him, her hand a light, anxious weight on his arm. Her face, usually a mask of patrician composure, was etched with a worry that mirrored his own. "You've been standing here since before dawn," she murmured, her voice a low thread of sound against the city's disquiet. "What is it you see, Gaius?" He did not turn, his eyes fixed on the distant, opulent mass of the imperial palace. "I see a ghost on the throne, my love. A man who won an empire in a day, and now seems intent on losing it just as quickly. Marcus Salvius Otho, a name known more in the city's decadent parlors and gambling dens than in the hallowed halls of the Senate. He had been a friend of Nero, a companion in debauchery, until Nero had coveted his beautiful wife, Poppaea Sabina, and exiled Otho to Lusitania. For 10 years, he had governed the province with surprising competence, a detail most of Rome seemed to have conveniently forgotten. They remembered only the perfumed fop, the extravagant host, the man who was said to wear a wig to hide his premature baldness. "The Senate acclaimed him," Livia reminded him softly. "The Guard supports him. The people will follow the grain dole and the games." "The people are fickle," Gaius countered, finally turning to face her. He traced the worried line between her brows with his thumb. "The Guard's loyalty is a poisoned chalice. They have tasted their power. They will not be content to sip. As for the Senate, we acclaimed him with swords at our throats. It was not a choice, it was a surrender." His mind drifted back to the chaotic scene in the Curia 2 days prior, the senators, pale and trembling, raising their hands in unison, as the Praetorians, their swords still stained, watched from the aisles. Otho had stood before them, not with the gravitas of an emperor, but with the nervous energy of a gambler who had staked everything on a single throw and could not quite believe he had won. He had promised to respect the Senate, to rule in partnership, to be the emperor they had hoped for, but his eyes, dark and restless, had darted around the chamber, betraying a fear that his words tried to conceal. "He is not a monster like Caligula, nor a tyrant like Nero," Livia offered, a sliver of hope in her voice. "No," Gaius conceded, "he is something far more dangerous. He is weak, and weakness in that position is a vacuum. Nature and Rome abhors a vacuum. Something will rush to fill it." His words were prophetic. The first reports had already begun to trickle in from the north. Aulus Vitellius, commander of the legions on the Rhine, a man whose gluttony was as legendary as his ambition, had been proclaimed emperor by his own troops. The German legions were marching on Italy. War was coming. A civil war, the most vicious and soul-destroying of all conflicts, pitting Roman against Roman. And on the throne sat a man who had spent his life charming his way out of trouble, not commanding armies into battle. That evening, Gaius received a summons, not to the palace, but to a discreet villa on the Aventine Hill, a property known to belong to Titus Vinus, the disgraced consul who had been Galba's right-hand man and had been cut down alongside him. The messenger was a freedman whose face was carefully blank, his instructions delivered in a whisper. The emperor wishes a private word. The secrecy was a living thing, a cloak of shadows that enveloped Gaius as his litter was carried through the darkening streets. The city was putting on a brave face. Torches burned brightly, wine flowed in the taverns, but the laughter was brittle, the revelry forced. It was the frantic gaiety of a city holding its breath. The villa was quiet, guarded not by Praetorians, but by a handful of loyal retainers from Otho's own household. Gaius was led through a modest peristyle garden, the scent of winter jasmine heavy in the air, to a small study. Otho was there, but he was not the man from the Senate. The imperial toga was gone, replaced by a simple, dark tunic. He was not wearing the infamous wig, and his thinning hair was slicked back from a high, intelligent forehead. He sat behind a large wooden desk, cluttered with scrolls and maps, a cup of wine untouched beside him. He looked less like an emperor and more like a hurried merchant trying to balance his accounts. And he was not alone. A man stood in the shadows near the window, a figure of lean, coiled intensity. As he stepped forward, Gaius recognized him. Cornelius Laco, the former prefect of the Praetorian Guard under Galba, a man who, by all rights, should have been executed, or at the very least, exiled. "Senator Longinus," Otho began, his voice lacking its usual smooth, charming cadence. It was strained. "Thank you for coming. I trust your journey was untroubled." "It was, Caesar," Gaius replied, his mind racing. Vinius's villa, Laco at Otho's side. This was not a meeting, it was a conspiracy. "Please," Otho gestured to a chair, "dispense with the formalities. We are not in the Curia now. We are three men trying to hold a crumbling world together." He finally picked up the wine cup, his hand trembling slightly. "Laco has been enlightening me about the true state of the treasury, about the allegiances of the legions, about the promises Galba made and failed to keep." Laco spoke for the first time, his voice a low rasp. Galba was a fool. He thought he could rule Rome with the parsimony of a provincial magistrate. He alienated everyone, the army, the Senate, the people. His end was inevitable. His end was murder, Gaius stated, his gaze steady. A flicker of something, shame, regret, crossed Otho's face. "It was," he admitted softly, "a necessary one, perhaps, a brutal one, certainly. I did not want it, not like that, but the guard was a river in flood. I either rode the crest of the wave or was drowned by it." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading, desperate. "That is the truth, Gaius. I am not the monster they will paint me as. I am a man who stepped into a void." "A void you helped create," Gaius said, the words sharper than he intended. Otho flinched, but nodded. "Yes, a void I helped create. And now I must fill it. Vitellius is coming. His legions are the best in the empire. My Praetorians are pampered palace soldiers, and the legions loyal to me are scattered. I need time, I need money, and I need the Senate. I need you." Here it was, the hidden truth. Otho was not the confident, decisive ruler he pretended to be. He was terrified. He was trapped by the very forces that had elevated him. The donative he had promised to each Praetorian was a debt he could not pay. The treasury was bare. He was an emperor in name only, a puppet whose strings were held by men like Laco and the Praetorian prefects who had orchestrated the coup. "What do you want from me?" Gaius asked. "Your voice," Otho said simply. "Your reputation. Speak for me in the Senate. Convince them that I am not Nero reborn, that I am Rome's best hope against the tyranny of the German legions. Help me raise funds, levy troops. Help me save the city from another bloody civil war." He spoke of saving Rome, but Gaius heard the real plea beneath the rhetoric. "Help me save myself." Gaius looked from Otho's desperate face to Laco's cold, calculating one. He was being asked to legitimize a murderer, to prop up a regime born of treachery. But the alternative, Vitellius, a man of base appetites and cruel whims, backed by an army hungry for plunder. The thought of those legions sacking Rome, of the chaos and slaughter that would follow, was a nightmare.
He was trapped between a weak usurper and a brutish one. It was a choice between two poisons. "I will speak for you," Gaius heard himself say, the words tasting like ash. "Not for your sake, Otho, but for Rome's." For the next 2 days, Gaius did as he promised. He delivered a stirring speech in the Senate, appealing to their patriotism, their fear of civil war, their duty to the state. He worked tirelessly, meeting with wealthy equestrians, persuading them to offer loans to the new regime. He watched as Otho, buoyed by this new wave of support, began to act the part of the emperor. He made sensible appointments. He spoke with dignity. He even wrote conciliatory letters to Vitellius, offering to share power, to become his son-in-law. It was a masterful performance. For a fleeting moment, Gaius allowed himself to hope. Perhaps Otho could grow into the role. Perhaps this desperate gamble could yet succeed. The plot twist came on the third night, not with the clash of swords or the roar of a mob, but in the quiet of Gaius's own home. Livia came to him in his study, her face ashen, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. "A message came," she whispered, holding out a small, sealed scroll. "It is from my cousin, Decimus. He serves with the 7th Legion, in Pannonia." Gaius took the scroll. The seal was that of the Legion, not a private one. His fingers fumbled as he broke it. The message was short, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. "Cousin, the news from Rome is a lie. We received 2 sets of orders. The first, bearing Galba's seal, arrived 5 days ago. It named Marcus Salvius Otho as his chosen heir and successor. The second, bearing Otho's own seal, arrived this morning, announcing Galba's death and his own acclamation. The men are confused, but the tribunes loyal to Otho are spreading the story of a Senate plot against Galba. It is a fabrication. Otho was the chosen heir. He had no need for a coup. Burn this. Do not trust the new Caesar." Gaius read the message twice, then a third time. The words swam before his eyes. It couldn't be true. It made no sense. Galba had chosen Otho. The old, stern, moralizing Galba had selected the profligate, disgraced friend of Nero as his heir. It was unthinkable. Galba had adopted Lucius Piso, a man of impeachable character, in a public ceremony just a week ago. Unless that ceremony had been a lie, a piece of theater to placate the conservative elements of the Senate, while the real transfer of power was being arranged in secret. But if Otho was the legitimate heir, then why the coup? Why the bloodshed? Why murder the man who was giving you an empire? The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The Praetorians. Laco had said it himself. Galba was a fool. He alienated everyone. He had refused to pay the guard the donative they expected for their support in overthrowing Nero. They were angry, resentful, and powerful. If they learned that Galba was planning a peaceful transfer of power to Otho, their leverage would be gone. A new emperor legitimately installed would have no need to buy their loyalty with exorbitant sums. So they had forced the issue. They had manufactured a crisis.
They had murdered the old emperor and the designated heir, Piso, to make it look like a violent seizure of power. They had acclaimed Otho in the midst of the chaos, making him their creature, forever indebted to them, forever bound to their demands. Otho wasn't riding the wave. He was dragged under by it. He wasn't a usurper. He was a hostage. The speech in the Senate, the desperate plea in the villa, the performance of the last 2 days, it was all a charade. Not Otho's charade, but the guards. He was playing the part they had written for him, the weak, illegitimate emperor who depended on them for his very survival. He was trapped, not by his own ambition, but by theirs. His entire reign was built on a foundation of lies, a dark, secret truth known to only a handful of men. Gaius looked at the scroll in his hand and then at his wife's terrified face. "He's a dead man," he breathed. "He has been a dead man since the moment they raised him on their shields. He was too weak to defy the guard and too compromised to lead Rome. And Vitellius was coming." The end came faster than anyone could have imagined. Otho, trapped and desperate, made the only move he could. He decided to march out and confront Vitellius's forces himself. It was a fool's errand, a desperate attempt to prove he was the commander he was pretending to be.
Gaius saw him one last time, on the morning he was to leave the city. Otho was clad in gleaming armor, a scarlet cape flowing from his shoulders. He was mounted on a magnificent white stallion, the very picture of an imperator. The Praetorians formed his honor guard, their faces impassive, their loyalty a suffocating shroud. The people of Rome lined the streets, cheering. They cheered for the show, for the spectacle of it all. They did not see the ghost in the armor. As Otho rode past the forum, his eyes met Gaius's for a brief, searing moment. In their depths, Gaius saw no hope, no defiance. He saw only a profound, bottomless despair, an acceptance of his fate. In that instant, Gaius understood. Otho was not marching to a battle. He was marching to his death. It was the only escape left to him. The news from the north was sporadic, contradictory. There was a battle near Bedriacum. Otho's forces had fought bravely but were overwhelmed. Then, silence. For 3 days, Rome waited. The silence stretched, thin and taut, until it snapped. A lone messenger, his horse lathered in sweat, his face streaked with dust and tears, galloped into the city. He carried not a victory dispatch, but a scroll containing the emperor's final words. Otho had not been captured. He had not fled. After the defeat, he had retired to his tent. He had spoken to his remaining soldiers, urging them to make their peace with Vitellius, to not throw away their lives for a lost cause. He had thanked them for their loyalty. Then, as dawn broke, he had taken a dagger and plunged it into his own heart. He had been emperor for 95 days. The Senate, ever pragmatic, immediately declared for Vitellius. The statues of Otho were torn down, his name chiseled from the monuments. It was as if he had never been. His brief, tragic reign was an inconvenient footnote, a brief spasm in the death throes of the Republic. Gaius walked through the silent halls of his domus. The city outside was already preparing to welcome its new master. The chameleon crowds were practicing a new name, a new cheer. He thought of Otho, not the perfumed fop of rumor, nor the blood-soaked usurper of the official story, but the terrified, trapped man in the quiet villa. A man who had been given an empire only to have it transformed into a gilded cage. A man whose greatest crime, perhaps, was that he was simply not strong enough for the brutal age he lived in.
His suicide in the end was not an act of cowardice, but his first and only true act as emperor. In choosing his own death, he had spared Rome a prolonged civil war. He had saved the very men who had betrayed him. It was a final, tragic irony and a life full of them. Livia found him by the hearth, staring into the flames as he fed his cousin's scroll into the fire. The parchment curled, blackened, and turned to ash, its secret truth dissolving into nothing. "He is gone," Livia said softly. "Yes," Gaius replied, "gone. Like a ripple in the water. Soon, no one will even remember his name." He looked out at the city, a city that had already forgotten. The enigma of Marcus Salvius Otho was complete. He was not a hero, not a villain. He was just a man swallowed by the relentless, grinding gears of history. His story a whispered secret, a ghost haunting the edges of Rome's grand, bloody narrative. And in the vast, unforgiving memory of the empire, 3 days of fear, hope, and despair were less than a blink of an eye. They were nothing.